Cool. So my name is Nalini Daima. I'm Senior Partner SE at HashiCorp, and welcome everyone to this session. So before we begin, why are we here for credential injection? And why do we care? So let's take a look at, what are some of the common tactics of a cyber attack. Whenever an organization gets attacked, how does the attack begin? So this is, again, not proprietary to HashiCorp. This is a typical model that has been generated by a global foundation, which is known as MITRE ATT&CK. So this is a very standard MITRE ATT&CK framework. And according to this framework, typically a hacker would gain initial access to your network or, through a Bastion server or through some server that somehow has got permissions, right? Like it has got powers, it can connect to pretty much all your environments. And if it gains access to such a server, then the hacker would go ahead and, get privilege escalation, gain higher permissions, and then try to steal more credentials, more account names, and then laterally move across your applications from one web application server to another and to the database in order to steal data. And then, if it gets access to the data, pretty much the game is over because, then you can end up in a situation where the hacker now has access to customer data, personally identifiable information, or all the sensitive data that your organization cares about. So why do we actually care, and why should we worry about this entire attack framework? Well, it's quite obvious that if your PII data gets stolen, then you can then be in a situation where you have lost the trust of your customers, loss of revenue, not to mention hefty fines. But again, it's not just financial impact due to a cyber attack or stolen data. It's also the brand damage, the reputation damage of your organization. So with that background, right, what happens during a typical attack? I would like to draw your attention towards the first step where the hacker gains access to such an important server or such an important system that it can then exploit. So how does initial access happen? Initial access usually happens because of exposed credentials such as username, passwords, or access keys or SSH keys. And this is, over and over been proven in different investigation reports. So Verizon is a body that does, data breach investigation report every year. Again, this report is available for free. So if you are interested, please go and subscribe to the Verizon data breach report. This year's report will be coming out in 2024, the month of May. Which is why I'm referring to 2023 report. And so if you see the screen, the most common attack vector is 86% at the top. And that 86% is the stolen credentials, meaning exposed passwords, exposed SSH keys. And so how do we mitigate, this credential exposure? Well, you can do a lot of different things. You can generate just-in-time credentials. So meaning the credentials like passwords or SSH keys are not long-lived. They are generated just when you need them, and then they get expired or rotated dynamically. But even if you do that, someone still has to grab those credentials and someone still has to type them in or copy and paste, and you are still making the credentials visible. So coming back to the original concern, right? Like how do we never expose the credentials and how do we make them invisible? Well, yes, that's possible. And Boundary does exactly the same. So HashiCorp Boundary does a lot of cool stuff. But one of the things it does is it can do an automatic credential injection. So as a remote user, I can log in with a trusted identity. I can get authenticated and authorized, and I can get, least privilege access. And then I can select what hosts, what servers, or web-based services that I'm able to connect to. And then I never have to enter any password or SSH key because Boundary can connect you automatically and Boundary can inject those credentials automatically. So how does the remote access workflow look like with HashiCorp Boundary? So HashiCorp Boundary has three components. The ones in the red are highlighted here. The first one is Boundary Controller. Boundary Controller is nothing but Boundary Server. Again, you can host it yourself, or you can use HCP Boundary, which is a fully managed service or SaaS offered by HashiCorp. It has a Boundary client, which is a CLI, or you can use a desktop app, which is what we are going to use today for the demo. And so as a remote user, I will log into this desktop app. The desktop app will then, authenticate me either using username, password maintained by Boundary, or it can go and connect to the most common identity providers, like Azure AD, Okta, Ping Identity, or Auth0. And so once I'm authenticated through single sign-on, then I have a list of targets that I can connect to. And it will display me, what targets can I connect to. And once I choose a target, then Boundary can pass the credentials on to the Boundary worker. So basically, I, as an end user, am never exposed to the credentials. And then Boundary worker injects your password or SSH keys into the target workloads. And so that way we are, safeguarding the sensitive credentials. One of the optional integration is obviously with the HashiCorp Vault, because if you don't want to store any credentials statically within Boundary, then Boundary can also integrate with HashiCorp Vault, and Vault can do the dynamic just-in-time credential generation, rotation, and expiry. And Boundary will grab those creds from Vault, and it will pass it on to the target server. Again, one note about Boundary Worker, HashiCorp provides fully managed or Boundary managed workers, but if you are a very strict organization, you can still host your own Boundary Worker within the private VPC or the private network of your organization. So let's actually take a look it in action and see how it does credential injection. So before I show you the demo, let me actually take a quick note on what are the different types of credentials that are supported for SSH access. So Boundary supports things like username and password, public keys, and SSH certificates for SSH access, as well as, if you are integrating it with Vault, then Vault can generate dynamic credentials such as, username, passwords using KV secrets, or it can use its database engine for dynamic credentials for databases, and also SSH certificates. So today what I'm going to show you is I'm going to pretend to be this black box user, remote user connecting via a Boundary client. Boundary has my SSH credentials, which I will use to connect to a Linux server that is running in my AWS VPC. So I have a Bastion host using typical AWS AMI, nothing fancy about that. And then I have installed basically a Boundary client, which is a desktop application. So I will show you how I log into that and how I pass the cluster URL. My Boundary server or Boundary controller is running in HashiCorp network. And so it's running on HashiCorp platform, and that is where it stores my SSH key and SSH credentials. And so it will seamlessly pass those and inject into the target host. So thereby I will never see the SSH keys, and I will never have to download them and store it on my laptop. So let's take a look at the demo here. So basically, this is a HashiCorp platform. For those of you who haven't seen this before, you can still go to, portal.cloud.hashicorp.com and you can register there for free, create a free account. What I did for the purpose of the demo and for the ease of access as well, if you go with HCP Boundary, you don't have to install any cluster yourself. All you need to do is, click a button and get your demo cluster up and running. Once the cluster has started, it will publish a URL. So it shows you a cluster URL here. In my cluster, you can see that there is an admin UI button. So when I click on that admin UI button, what I have done is I have created an organization, and that is my dev org. Inside my dev org, there is a project and there is an engineering dev project, and you can have multiple, dev, test, prod projects, or you could have multiple teams and you can classify, projects according to your team structure. And inside that project, then I have a couple of targets. So what I have done is I have a Bastion host running in my EC2 instance within my AWS account. And I will try to connect to this EC2 instance without passing any SSH key myself. So basically, this target, if you see, has injected credentials. And you can see that it is injecting a username with an SSH key pair. So once I have configured that, then I can log in onto my Boundary client. So I have installed, a Boundary client. This Boundary client can be installed from the HashiCorp website. If you go and download, for your Windows or Mac, the desktop clients, then it'll just get downloaded as a zip file or an app, and you can install it and use that as the client to log in. So there is an option to change your cluster URL. So this is where you will tell your client, like, hey, where is my Boundary cluster? Where do I need to connect to? So I have currently copied the cluster URL and configured this. And if you want to find the cluster URL, you can go back to your Boundary cluster. And on the first screen, you would notice this is your server URL or cluster URL. And you would copy that and configure in the Boundary client. So if I log in, hopefully I typed in my password correct. Yeah. So when I log into my Boundary client, you can see that I have access to only one server, and I can only connect to this one server. So what I'll go ahead and basically click on the connect button. And here it connects me on this shell. And you can do the same thing with a CLI as well. So if you are using CLI, basically you can run Boundary Authenticate and Boundary Connect to a target. And that will be running in your own terminal rather than running in this Boundary client shell. So I can then, I'm logged in and I can do whatever I like on this server. So maybe I'll just go and tail some Cloud Init logs. Output log, yeah. So my connection is now live. I'm connected to this Bastion host and I'm tailing a couple of logs. And at no point did I need to type in an IP address or a DNS, DNS name, or at no point did I need to type in my SSH key. And so Boundary has automatically injected the credentials. Now there's one more thing I'd like to show. Is that if I go to the admin console, as an admin, I can actually see the live sessions. So if I refresh this, it should show me the time here, like, this session is live. And this session, if I think is doing something unexpected and I don't like or I don't trust this particular session user, I can go and terminate their session. So for example, now this is my live session. I can go as an admin and terminate this session from the admin console. So now if I take a look, that session has been terminated. And here I would see as a remote user that my session has been closed by the remote host. And so that's another way, you know, as an admin, you can basically take a look at who's doing what activity. If this is suspicious activity, you can then go and terminate their sessions. And then you can take a deeper look with various cool functions such as session recording as well. But that's pretty much the demo for today. That's what I wanted to show. Before I open the session for Q&A, let me go back and summarize a couple of key things. And I'll take a look at the questions in just a tick. So if we were to summarize, what does HashiCorp Boundary do? Well, it is securing human-to-machine access. So human-to-machine remote access. And how does it do that? It does that with a lot of cool functions, such as credential injection, credential brokering. It also does things like automatic host discovery. So if you can configure certain tags, for example, environment equals dev and application equals, you know, my web app, then it can go and scan all the EC2 instances or all the servers in the cloud of your preference. And then it will scan all the hosts matching that tag. And then it will create an automatic catalog, which you can then control for access. It also does things like granular session recording and session visibility. So you can record all the activity that is taking place on your servers. And then you can take, you know, an informed decision based on that session visibility. So thanks for your time today. If that has sparked any interest in Boundary, definitely reach out to me on the email ID on your screen.